Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Planning Control Committee on Thursday, the 17th of November, 2022. Are there any apologies, first of all?
Chair, I've got apologies from Councillor Tracy Pearce and Councillor Shiraz Khan.
Thank you. Any apologies from the floor at all? Thank you. Paul, any late items?
I've none.
Any declarations of interest? None, thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of October 2022. Has everybody gone through them? Does anybody want to move them? Seconder, thank you. Item 5, minutes of the meeting of the Conservation and Heritage Advisory Committee held on the 7th of September 2022. Does anybody want to, are they noted? Is everybody happy?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a few to report, the first two being the most notable, actually. The first one was the erection of a dwelling on land at the rear of 298 Burton Road with access off Warner Street, if you know the area. Warner Street kind of peters out into a cobbled street with a bungalow at the end, and the land on its sort of northern side rises steeply to the back of the properties on Burton Road. And we had an application to site a dwelling to the rear of the properties on Burton Road at the top of that embankment of trees. We refused permission on the grounds it was an isolated dwelling, it was out of character, not within the settlement or related to the existing pattern of development. And the inspector disagreed, felt that that wasn't the case, that it was a reasonable location, there was a concrete base to facilitate it, and that it was related to the existing pattern of development. So it was allowed. It's quite an interesting read if you are so inclined. It makes reference to its woodland position, impact on trees, impact on the pressure on future pruning of trees, and so one that we didn't win there, Chair, but an interesting case nonetheless. Secondly, an important listed building case that colleagues have been heavily involved with, and it's a very interesting read. I circulated this to you and the Chair some time ago, and it was for the retention of a dumbwaiter, a food hoist from a ground floor restaurant to a second floor kitchen at 36 Sadlergate, and the issues turned on the listed building element, the relevant parts of the Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act, and the impact on the character of the Grade 2 listed building. It's a good read. It's worth looking at because it talks about the importance of heritage assets, and paragraph 20 in particular kind of sums it all up. So if you want to hone in on that particular part of it, I mean, clearly we're very, very aware of the importance of commerce, uplifting economic activity within the city centre, and continually striving to enhance its vitality and viability, particularly in these post-COVID times. So it was a carefully assessed application. We didn't simply refuse permission. We were very mindful of the benefits of the use which serviced a restaurant, but of course we have to be mindful of the importance of heritage assets and the importance of listed building legislation and policy in that area. So worth a read, Chair. I would promote that one. And then the remaining 4 items, less interesting, unless you're interested in advertisement displays, of course. We had 2 dismissed and 2 allowed. The items that were dismissed at appeal were largely adverts in sensitive locations in the historic core of the city. And so pleased about their dismissal. It supports our stance in those particular locations. And on mature reflection, the 2 that were allowed were in less sensitive locations where there was more street clutter, and the inspector gave a good appraisal of all those individual appeals, so worth a read. So they're the appeals thus far, Chair. We've got more to report in December. Our appeal record is still very good. It's covered off in the following performance report. So I will take any questions if there are any. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions for Ian at all? Thank you. Item 7, which I believe is back to you, Ian.
Yes, thanks. Me again, Chair. I'll take any questions on this, Chair, if there are any. Just to highlight that in the report, in part 4.1, there are a list of jobs, a list of application types that aren't included in the performance regime, but they are very resource intensive. So they do take officer time and involvement. Some of those relating to things like certificates of lawfulness can be very resource intensive, often involve Mr. Teasdale for his legal perspective. Sometimes they involve follow-up public meetings that have involved me and Mr. Clark recently. So they don't feature in the statistics, but they do have their resource implications. A good result in part 4.2, which shows that we were 100% performance on major applications, which is good. Members of the team, Laura, Aaron, people who here tonight, and colleagues deal with those applications, which are, of course, strategically important, so that's good. And part 10.1 of the report deals with health and safety implications in the context of coming out of the COVID lockdown. We've tried to encourage officers to remain fully engaged with the team, but it's been difficult over the last 2 years, Chair. As you'll appreciate, some officers working in complete isolation. So we've tried to maintain through various team meetings and other events to keep in touch, make sure people are fully engaged and working well and have a good personal health and well-being. So that's the performance report, and happy to take any questions on any of those elements, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Also note paragraph 4.14, and I think on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank your department for all its efforts. Thank you. Any other questions? Got away with that one then, Ian. Well done. Right. Now we move on to applications to be considered. And I'm going to pass on to Paul to present land at St Peter's Churchyard.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 applications that members will be familiar with from our last meeting and from the recent site visit. One seeks planning permission and the other listed building consent for this city centre site. And I'll deal with the planning application first. So, housekeeping for both applications. There's on page 19 of your report, there's an error in the terminology. It reads, as there is harm level of harm, where really it should read, as there is a level of harm. I'm sure you all realise that anyway. And the second bullet point I've got here is the economic statement and a statement for the site visit. They've been referred to you for your attention. This planning application seeks permission to use the open land at St Peter's Churchyard as an outdoor street food market with 12 market stalls, seating, decking and ramps, all set on a raised surface, operating between 9 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock at night, Monday to Sundays. Now those times are based on the recent economic statement that we received. Now my attention's been drawn to, and I can't really answer it, but why is this application come in when there are many vacant units in the city centre? Well, it's for the applicant to make an application here because that's what they feel they want to do. The application site comprises a fairly small open space without a current access or parking area. You'll have seen that from your site visit. It's hemmed in by buildings and contains a large number of mature trees. The streets and spaces and many of the buildings and plots, although altered over the centuries, contribute to the overall historical significance of this part of Derby. The surrounding buildings, including the small old grammar school, and that borders the site on its east, dates from the early 17th century and is Grade 2 star listed. Grade 2 star, for those that know, are the top 8% of listed structures in the country. Indicates a very high historical significance. As an open space, this site reveals the restricted view of the listed buildings, and the application site is an important component of the building's setting and makes a largely positive contribution to its significance as a designated heritage asset. St Peter's Church, situated adjacent and immediately to the east of the Old Grammar School, is also Grade 2 star. Both the church and its boundary walls are listed, and the evidence before us indicates that the stone wall fronting the application site is included within the listing. Parts of the church date from the 14th century, and there have been additions and alterations in the 16th and 19th centuries. Particularly given the constrained context of the application site forms an important part of the setting of the church. In aesthetic terms, as a green space with mature trees bounded by the stone boundary wall and affording key views of the church tower down St Peter's Churchyard. You will have seen all this from your site visit. Its historical function and relationship also contributes importantly to the church's setting. Opposite the site, there's the Grade 2 listed 19th century former county court, and within this context you've got the wall, the trees, the open space, and a very important major setting of those listed buildings. Historically, this is a sensitive site, given the setting of those heritage assets. A number of trees on the site are protected by a tree preservation order, and other vegetation is protected by conservation area setting. The new access to this landlocked site, as it has no ready pedestrian or vehicular access itself, is proposed by the insertion of steps and a lift platform into the Grade 2 star listed wall close to its junction with the Grade 2 star listed grammar school. This new opening would require a new sandstone retaining wall within the application site, and 2 trees are proposed, as is cycle parking close to the entrance. From your report, you will note that Marketing Derby support the proposed change of use and Dispute Historic England's consultation response, which you will note advises that harm would be created by the proposal as the whole transforming of the character of the green space and erodes the setting of the highly graded historic assets. As the proposal affects the setting of listed buildings in the conservation area, the statutory requirement is to have special regard to the desirability of preserving a listed building or its setting or any features of special architectural or historic interest which it possesses. And that's written into the Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act. And we need to pay special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the conservation area. Again, that's written into the 1990 Act. So they must be taken into account when determining this application. The National Planning Policy Framework is clear that the requirement to take account of the desirability of sustaining and enhancing the significance of heritage assets and the desirability of new development making a positive contribution to local character of distinctiveness is reaffirmed in paragraph 197 of the National Planning Policy Framework. So my question is, and I'm sure your nagging question is, will this development, including the insertion of the new access into the listed wall, make that positive contribution to local character and distinctiveness? Now, significance can be harmed or lost through development within a heritage assets setting, and any harm or loss to significance should require clear and convincing justification. Clear and convincing justification, I've lifted that straight from paragraph 200 of the National Planning Policy Framework. In determining the application, members will need to consider whether any public benefits associated with the scheme outweigh the harm caused by the impact of the proposed new development, and that's taken straight from paragraph 202 of the NPPF. Now, overall, having reviewed such benefits, Historic England advised that planning permission should not be granted for any development within the important open space that is detrimental to the setting of St Peter's Church and Churchyard. Historic England has previously supported the view that this is an important open space within the conservation area, that the development of this site is therefore unacceptable in principle. Their view remains unchanged, concluding that the applications do not meet the requirements of the NPPF, in particular paragraph 200 and 202, the ones I've just referred to, and to our own conservation management plan from 2013, as outlined in more detail in your report. The county archaeologist, as stated in your report, has confirmed that his objection that because of the archaeological sensitivity of the site, their belief is there would remain a high potential for remains of early medieval, high medieval and post-medieval archaeology to survive within the site, that these could potentially include burials. And the archaeologist has recommended predetermination archaeological evaluation, and has said without the results of the evaluation on the application is deficient against the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 194, and we object on those grounds. This includes the excavation for the new access through the retaining wall. In planning policy terms, the proposal would give rise to a loss of public green open space in an area of deficit. There has not been any assessment in accordance with our own planning policy, C17, an omission possibly by the application. This application and your report brings to a head the question of impact of the historic environment versus economic benefits arising from the scheme. And any decision maker is going to have to balance those two. So it's the historic environment and its impacts versus the economic benefits arising from the scheme. And in your report, we've tried to identify those steps required to take when considering the impact and significance on designated heritage assets. A lot of it relates back to the inspector's determination on the scheme on Sadlergate, which Ian referred to earlier. Now, the benefits, we're told, are unquantified footfall and employment opportunities, and they're listed in your report. The impacts of the scheme are rehearsed also in your report, where I note that this site was the outdoor amenity space for St Peter's House residents, but has now been sold off. So, I have to question, after all that, is this the right location for this development, or this development type, bearing in mind its historic setting? The planning balance and judgment on page 43 places greater weight in the specialist consultee responses from Historic England and the archaeology response, agreeing that the level of harm is not outweighed by the public benefits and follows national and local planning policy that the development should be resisted. Your report promotes two reasons for refusal based upon the unacceptable harm to the Grade 2 star listed assets and the loss of currently undeveloped open space. This is a difficult one for you to weigh up, its historic impact versus the economic benefits of a scheme on this site. And we've arrived at a recommendation for you, which, Chair, you have two speakers. One speaker on this and then one later on the planning, on the list of building application, but I think one speaker on the list on the planning application first.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Wardle, press your button to speak. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to committee members that visited the site last Thursday. Hopefully it helped to visualise and understand the proposal and also answer any questions or concerns. This is an important period in both history and future of Derby and the city. The retail environment is changing and cities must keep up with this change to thrive and survive. People no longer look to a city centre just to shop in the old-fashioned sense of the word. They want experiences, want to eat and drink, meet friends, they want variety and choice. With this proposal, the city has a perfect opportunity to create a new offering that will complement and enhance its current consumer offering. With the Becketwell development continue to bring new life to the city, St Peter's Churchyard will become an extremely busy thoroughfare and link through the city. We'll have approximately 500 to 600 apartments within 200 metres of the site, numerous businesses and soon to be leisure facilities as stage 2 of Becketwell commences. If we look at the city from a wider view, we'll have food and drink hubs in the new Market Hall, Derby On, the new Eastern Gateway and hopefully our proposal. This strategic location is the perfect spot for a further food and drink destination. Consumers can enjoy a wide variety of food and drink vendors in one spot whilst enjoying the green surroundings. Traders will enjoy the heavy footfall and new business. Local businesses will also see increased trade due to new footfall. Empty shops in the area will more likely be taken up as the development acts as a catalyst for new investment and new business in the locality. The supply chain will benefit from new business and increased growth. New jobs will be created, an initial 50 directly on the site, with an estimated further 150 within the supply chain and indirect employment. We currently have the funds in place to commence the project immediately. We have the various special contractors in place, we have the material sourced, and most importantly, we also have extremely strong demand and interest from quality traders who want a vending unit. We already have 9 conditional expressions of interest in the units, and upon planning, obviously we can further market and push the proposal to ensure full capacity prior to opening. Currently, all major cities in the UK and Europe are embracing proposals such as this. In this country, we have similar examples in Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, London, that are creating and championing quirky, interesting and funky food and drink offerings in the city. The question is, do we want to put Derby on the map with innovative new developments like this, or do we live in the past and run the risk of further neglect, decay and downturn in the retail offering and the city centre in general? Yes, and I can understand this is an important decision for you tonight, but as with all important decisions, if we break it down, it is actually quite a simple one. The simple fact is, the numerous and wide-ranging benefits of this proposal far outweigh any perceived negatives. Well, thank you for your time and hope that the correct decision will be reached tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wardle. An excellently timed presentation. Thank you. I'll open this up to the panel now. I know a number of us went on the site visit, so I'll be interested on your comments. Thank you very much. Who wants to speak? Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. We start with the negatives because or possibly positive, I don't know. I've rarely read such supportive comments from Historic England as we have about the value of this site. They've gone over and beyond what we normally get from them. And therefore they clearly consider it to be a really important area of the city. And okay, it's from the point of view of most people, it's a little bit of dead space that you walk past. But from their perspective, it is the setting. And if you put anything into it, then the setting changes. And I think that's basically what they're trying to say, that its value is in its inactivity. But they clearly think from a heritage perspective, it is really important. There were other areas that have also flagged up concerns. We've got environmental health who are concerned about noise and odour. The tree officer is concerned that we haven't done enough work on making sure that it's going to be okay. The county archaeologist wants a study doing before we determine this application. So there's a lot of concern about the way in which this process has gone forward. And in particular, I think that the lack of exploration from an archaeological point of view is really important. There seems to be some way of identifying where tree roots are before you put these screw things into the ground. But I'm not sure that they would identify, I don't know, the top of a sarcophagus with the remains of a body in it. I have no idea whether that would happen or whether you could drill down with that thing into the remains of a skull or something. I don't really want to think about it. But I think I think I've got real concerns that in terms of process, we probably shouldn't be determining this now if we're going to say yes to it, because we haven't got enough information. I appreciate having the additional comments about the economic situation, because yes, it would be great that the picture that we've just been given of a new funky area bringing people into the city, that was a wonderful vision to have. But that description also mentioned that there are going to be a number of other new food offerings coming anyway, and there's only so much food that people actually want to eat. And I have a concern that competition may start off with a significant number of businesses putting in upfront capital, investing in things, but after 6 months, a year's time, we may well find some of those businesses find it isn't viable and are moving away. And which of those establishments will they move away from? If we've approved this one and people aren't sticking with it, and I think particularly during the winter time, it's going to be a less attractive place to go than, say, the Market Hall, then at least it's a temporary structure and we can remove it. And therefore, Chair, I think it would be really important that if we do approve this, we also put in a condition that if it remains, if more than, I don't know, 50% of units remain vacant for more than 6 months or some other factor, we require it to be removed. And then it can revert back to being a green open space, which we know will improve the setting of the properties roundabout. I don't know if we can do a condition like that, but I don't really see why we shouldn't. Yes, yes, because it is a temporary structure, it will give us the flexibility to do that. The final thing I want to mention is the nature of the cut into the wall and the plans that we've got there in front of us. And I don't know the answer to this, and I think it would be really interesting to have other people comment on this. Where we have a pre-existing gap in the wall, it has finial details, it has gateposty things defining that location, and you see them there in the photo. And it shows that this is a gateway, and I am the corner of a gateway. The plans for this new gateway don't try to replicate that in any way. And maybe that is correct in that it says, oh, this is an afterthought, this is something that happened later, this is a change from the historic structure. But in 50 years' time, and I don't think a gap like that is going to be easy to refill, but again, that is something that would need to be written into a condition if it doesn't survive as a development. Would we actually want to have that gateway presented with gateposts and saying, this is a gateway for people, not gateway for vehicles? And if we think that that gateway character is not right, then again, I don't think we should be determining this tonight. My personal view is that I am not persuaded that the benefits, the potential benefits of this scheme actually are greater than the disbenefits and the damage that we could be doing by allowing it to go forward. And that's one of the reasons why I want to mitigate that damage, that potential damage, as strongly as I could, by saying that we should have a way of not leaving this as a bit of derelict space, because it wasn't derelict space until 2 years ago, and we've seen that on the background pictures. And I think I'm going to say something really sad now, because I really want Marketing Derby to be an authoritative and credible partner to us. And when they come up with a comment that says that this is a piece of abandoned and derelict and awful land for decades, when it hasn't been, and it's only been slightly overgrown for a couple of years, I think that undermines the other things that they are telling us. And I'm really sad about that part of the comment that we've had from them. But those are my views. I look forward to hearing others.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Paul, do you want to come back on one or two of the issues about the conditions and the nature of the cut into the wall and the change of setting, etc.?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try. I'm not sure I can condition the lack of usage. It's an either or, getting your planning permission for the 12 market stalls, whether it's 11 or 10 or 2.
5-year period?
I think, through you, Chair, I think granting a temporary permission, you're almost accepting the harm to the listed wall. The hole in the wall is going to take place. So if planning permission is granted, a hole in the wall takes place. Yes, I can condition the new gateway finials. You know, you can have your new hole in the wall, but I prefer the detail around the entrance features to make it look part and parcel of. Yes, I can condition that. I'm unsure whether I can condition the filling in of the opening if the thing doesn't succeed, as I don't think it would. It's either yes or no. It's a binary question. Is it okay, and we'll come on to that in the list of building application, is it okay to carve a hole in this wall to access this site, subject to condition about the detail of the posts and the entrance feature? But that's as far as we go. I can't condition it that you don't use it, or if it's only half used, or there's only one stall on there. You can write a condition, it's justifying the reason and making it reasonable and meeting the test of the condition, equally filling in the opening. I think that's a retrospective step because you've already done the damage, if assuming it gets listed building consent. So out of the 3 suggested conditions, Chair, I could probably hang my hat on one.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor West, did you put your hand up?
I did. Thanks for spotting me, Chair. And thank you to Mr Clark for his detailed introduction, because I no longer need to highlight all the policies that these 2 applications go against. Historic England has previously supported the view that this is an important open space within the conservation area and that development of this site is therefore unacceptable. I'm not trying to pretend that this parcel of land might not be able to be improved. I'm not trying to pretend that this is currently a beautiful piece of land. What I am stressing is that knocking down a piece of a grade 2-star listed wall, or as referenced, a wall that has heritage significance of a grade 2-star listed wall, is something that can't be rectified later. The stalls are only set to be open 9 till 5. They can't open later into the evening for Christmas shopping evenings, or when the new arena opens, due to their proximity with the apartments in St Peter's House. Whether the wall concerned is, as both our legal services and Historic England say, grade 2-star listed, or as the agent maintains has heritage significance of a grade 2-star listed structure, is largely immaterial. The detail in the application comes to us as the applicant has a piece of land without sufficient access for its planned usage. The access we used for the site visit was clearly insufficient for general access, but knocking a hole in a wall cannot be fixed if we change our minds in the future, as Paul has just said. The proposed landscaping does appear to mitigate the tree removals, but the fact remains that protected trees were removed without permission, and I'm not comfortable supporting an application that's removed protected trees to facilitate a potential development. Marketing Derby urges members of the committee to exercise their instinct and knowledge to approve the application and, in so doing, give a signal that Derby is serious about repurposing the city centre and is truly open for business. I am reminded that Marketing Derby, along with others, suggested we needed to agree to knock down one of the Pepperpot towers on the former DRI site to prove Derby was open to business. We didn't. The development went ahead, retained both Pepperpot towers, and the scheme has shown Derby is open to business and has also been nominated for awards. It's further shown that this planning committee, that I have been proud to be a part of since 2015, can make sensible decisions to enhance the city whilst looking after its heritage. The issue we always have to consider is, does the benefit outweigh the harm? In this case, no, in my opinion, it doesn't. I cannot support these applications, and I'm in agreement with the officer's recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to come back on that, Paul?
Not specifically on that point, although I do agree with Councillor West. Mr Woodhead quite rightly confirms to me that paragraph 57 of the NPPF and the Sadlergate Peel statement talks about, and it was about putting back, undoing the harm created. It's not really something that we should be considering. It's you either do it or you don't. You can't accept something and then, I think in the Sadlergate case, well, I've kept the timbers and I can put them back later stage when I remove the dumbwaiter that we put in. No, that's not appropriate. You either do or you don't. And the inspector was quite right that you cannot, in this case, keep the stonework and put it back at some future stage. Thank you.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, in view of what Mr Clark's just said and the early discussions, I have changed my mind. I was originally minded to approve this application on the basis that most of it is temporary and, in my view, could very easily be reinstated. So I wasn't that fussed about it. But the fact that we can't reinstate the wall, which I would assume was possible, has swayed me. So I'm now going to not approve this application or support the refusal. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Any other comments? Councillor Rawson, then.
Thank you, Chair. As Mr. Clark said earlier, it's a case of weighing up and balancing the potential harm against the potential benefit that can be derived for the city centre from the development of this site. So considering first of all the setting of the listed buildings, in terms of its current status as open space, I know other members have mentioned the fact that it may have been different in the past, but I think we have to consider the condition of the land as it is now. It's not accessible to members of the public in its current state. I don't think many members of the public would get any particular amenity or benefit from that piece of land. It can't be accessed. Yes, you can see it as you walk past in the street. But in my view, there is no real benefit arising from that piece of land other than the setting of the listed buildings. So obviously we need to consider that. So in principle, I've got no, and I said this last time, I've got no, I'm not against the use of that particular piece of land for something like this. When we look at the visuals and what's proposed in terms of the units, I think it looks good, and I think actually has the potential to enhance that piece of land and actually bring more people to enjoy the amenity and the benefit of that piece of land. It's not accessible at the moment, and by developing in it this way, it potentially opens it up for more people to come and enjoy the setting and enjoy the listed buildings in the vicinity. The harm is the access to the wall, and I don't think we can say anything else, and that is a harm because it is damaging a listed structure, and we can argue exactly how it's listed or what it's listed as, but it would be a harm. So it's balancing those two things up in my mind, and I think I do come down on the side of the benefit of the economic advantage that can potentially be derived for the city from this. The access point to the wall is relatively small when you compare it to the length of the wall. Accepting it can't be put back in the future. I think as long as efforts are made in order to make that, to limit the damage to the wall as much as possible, in order to provide access, then the economic benefits would outweigh that. So there are arguments on both sides, Chair, but I think I've come down on the side of approving this because of the economic benefits, in my mind, do outweigh any harm.
Thank you, Councillor Rawson. Councillor Nawaz.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with what Councillor Rawson says. I think it's an excellent opportunity to get this wasteland, get it going and get something on it. You know, it's in my ward as well. As it'll be an excellent idea to people coming into the city centre. Plus, when we went to see site visit, and it was excellent. I think it's an excellent idea, and I fully support this. And I think everybody else should support it as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Jennings?
Thank you, Chair. I think for me, the site visit really set the tone for me. It put things into perspective. When you look at the site, walking past it, it looks horrible. You know, there's an unlisted fence running across the top of the wall, presumably because of past issues with security. I think the visual benefit of having that taken down and opening it up visually is a big improvement in my mind for the local area. I thought that the plans themselves are non-invasive, apart from the wall. The market stalls, for example, are temporary in nature. So the permanent change would be the hole in the wall. And I'm still confused in my own mind as to what status of that wall is, because officers are telling us one thing, and the architects have, in the last meeting, said something completely different. And I think, in my mind, I'm not sure what the status of the wall is in terms of listing, but looking at the overall benefits of opening up that space, I'm minded to support the application. I think one of the other things that became very clear to me on the site visit is any medieval potential remains are buried under meters of backfill, and I think that really makes the site itself very difficult to justify archaeologically. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anybody else want to speak at all?
Clarify, pointing meters of that wall. I think obviously I should first say that we're actually we haven't actually turned to the listed building application in terms of the wall itself. I think that's going to be presented secondly. So shortly, this is in relation to we are considering the application itself, and it's not simply a concern in relation to harm to the wall. There's I think the heritage, both Heritage England and the conservation officers, or the heritage officers, are all sort of pointing out that there's potential harm to the surrounding area. So it's not. I think you've got to be careful not just to focus on the wall and the impact on the wall. It's the surround. But turning just to clarify that point in relation to the status of the wall, the wall is clearly a part and parcel of the curtilage. It would be classified as a curtilage listing. But I think it's section 5.1 or whatever of the Act. That therefore makes it as part of the curtilage of St. Peter's Church, I should say, which is a grade 2 star listed, and therefore the wall would get that same protection and be considered as part of a grade 2 listing. That's grade 2 star listing. And that is whatever the applicant says, that is the position. That is my advice. That's the advice from Heritage England. Obviously, sort of, when you consider the agent's argument was, well, it's not part of the description, and therefore it should be treated differently. Well, yes, it's not part of the description, but there's lots of elements of, I'd say, St. Peter's Church, which will not be in the listing, such as maybe the flooring, the roof tiles, etc. It doesn't mean that they lose the status of a grade 2-star listing. They need to be treated as such. So the argument to suggest, oh well, we think it should be considered lesser, is a non-argument. The wall itself is clearly considered by officers and by Heritage England as a grade 2-star listing and should be treated that way. I think, I don't know if I can add anything further. I don't know, Paul, if you want to add anything in relation to the considerations on that harm. I think you've probably outlined that sufficiently.
So we'll move to the vote then. If somebody, Councillor Kerr?
Chair, if it helps, and I've listened to the debate and I believe it is very close. It is a close weighing up the balance. And the point Councillor Kerr makes is a very, very strong, good point, that if members are minded to grant planning permission, they should perhaps only be minded to grant subject to predetermination archaeological investigation in line with the written scheme of investigation that the archaeologist has agreed. And just to emphasise that, to do otherwise would and to leave it to a condition would actually be contrary to the development plan, the National Planning Policy Framework and the specialist advice, and the previous appeals inspector, who was very keen on, whilst he refused the scheme, was keen on understanding what is in that ground before you make a planning approval. So, Chair, it helps, you might want to take it to the vote and to be minded to grant, subject to having those details back in front of you or officers deal with them, rather than a straight grant with conditions, if indeed you decide to go that way on the vote. Are you with me so far?
So far, yes. It's getting a bit more complicated as we...
Chair, sorry, can I on the point? Second point in relation to the wall would really be more pertinent in relation to the second application. So depending on obviously what happens with the first application, the application, then obviously we will probably revisit that point when we deal with the listed building application, which deals with the wall. Is that
I'm just wondering whether we need to put a condition in, if we approve this one, we'd need to put a condition in for the design of that, the edges of that break to be confirmed by officers for a final design, something or other, as it's part of the application. And that could then be determined according to what we say on the heritage front.
I think the point that Councillor Kerrs raised, particularly in terms of the archaeologist side of things, is particularly pertinent. I mean, it would give a potential ground for a refusal, full stop. I mean, but obviously, as it doesn't follow policy, but as you suggest, or as Paul says, there are potential ways to deal with that by deferral. Or by be minded to grant, yeah.
So, does somebody want to move and second the vote, which will be minded to grant planning permission?
No, sorry, no, I think so.
I'm happy to propose the officer's recommendation to refuse.
We got a seconder? Councillor Jennings? Should we take a vote?
This is in relation to refusing the planning act.
All those in favour? Those against? So that application is refused.
I'll go to the next one.
Yeah.
Hot on the heels of that one, I'm sorry, I seem to be taking up your time tonight. The second application is the listed building consent for those physical works to the insertion of the access into the Grade 2 style listed wall. That fronts St Peter's Churchyard. The proposed opening, as you'll be able to see from the slides, would be 1.8 metres wide. We've already spoken about the dispute between the applicant and Historic England and our legal officer regarding the status of the wall, but we've confirmed that it is Grade 2 star. So it's listed asset protected when St Peter's Church was listed. Now the main issue is whether the works preserve the Grade 2 star listed structure and any of the features of special architectural historic interest that it possesses. So we're considering the removal of that section of this Grade 2 star listed wall, its demolition to facilitate access to land behind as discussed in the previous application. You'll note from the history section of your report there was a previous refusal concerned with such partial demolition. There are 2 marketing Derby letters of support and a letter of concern about loss of trees, with the addition of the economic benefits statement which was circulated to you. Despite, and you'll have noticed this from your site visit, despite various stages of works that have been undertaken to the wall, for the most part the wall maintains its historic character, scale and proportions, as well as retaining elements of its historic fabric and architectural features. Thus, its historic character is still legible. It remains that its special interest is in the top 8% of the country's assets, considered to be of national importance and therefore worth protecting. Special interest of the listed structure is drawn from its surviving historic fabric, historic layout, and including its relationship with the church, the street, and the proportions with the remaining architectural features. The proposed works would introduce a sizable opening in the structure, along with steps, retaining walls, and a lift that would necessitate the removal of sections of ground to the rear of the wall. I would argue that these additional attributes pay no regard to the characteristics of the listed structure. Due to its wholly unsympathetic siting, it detracts from the setting of the historic architectural features and adds an unacceptable clutter to the relatively limited, unconstrained setting. Thus, the overall proposal is appreciated as a clumsy and unwanted addition to the traditional street scene, and reduces its remaining authenticity and legibility. This being so, the works impair the structure's historic legibility and fail to preserve its special interest. Now, the decision maker is required to give this harm considerable importance and weight in the balance of this application. We've read to it previously, paragraph 197 of the MPPF guides us in the desirability of sustaining and enhancing the significance of heritage assets and putting them to viable uses consistent with their conservation, the positive contribution that conservation of heritage assets can make to sustainable communities, including their economic vitality, and the desirability of new development making positive contribution to local character and distinctiveness. Framework advises in paragraph 199 that when considering the impact of proposal on the significance of a designated heritage asset, great weight should be given to the asset's conservation. Paragraph 200 goes on to advise that significance can be harmed through loss, through their alteration or destruction of those assets from development within their setting. Paragraph 202 of the framework requires that less than substantial harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal, including, where appropriate, securing its optimum viable use. Paragraph 200 states that any harm to or loss of the significance of a designated heritage asset and its alteration or destruction or from development within its setting should require clear and convincing justification. The submitted Heritage Impacts Supplement provides the statement of justification within its conclusion. However, it's noted that the access is for the project as a whole, not specific to the list of building works alone. The list of building application proposals therefore have very limited justification in that it will allow access to the proposed development on the land behind that land we've just refused, but we need to determine this because if and when they go to appeal, we need to have this considered as well. Historic England have duly considered the proposal and consider that, in our view, the current proposal in relation to the wall are more modest and less harmful than previous scheme. However, any harm caused would require clear and convincing justification and should be considered as part of this overall scheme. Similarly, Historic England have considered the whole project in their consultation responses. It's noted that a submission of further information from the applicant has not addressed the initial concerns raised by Historic England. Despite the reinstatement of the historic fabric of the wall that has been suggested by the applicant, strong concerns about harmful impacts of the proposal on the important boundary wall and its as a designated heritage asset remain, and that is a concern that the historic fabric will be lost. In my opinion, whilst the accompanying application, the previous one, provides support for this proposal, I do not consider that this is to be clear or convincing justification required under paragraph 200 of the National Planning Policy Framework, and therefore does not justify the harm that the insertion of the access to the wall would create. Making this recommendation, the public benefits are considered to be, they're listed in your report: fabric repairs to the masonry, removal of the harmful wire fence, reinstatement of lost features, the fleur-de-lis, the capping. And you have obviously taken into account the previous economic benefits statement in arriving at the previous decision, which was to refuse. So that has limited weight in determining this application. There are obviously benefits that the street food market could create on this site. However, due consideration has got to be given to the fact that a similar proposal has previously been refused and the current proposal has not been supported by consultees, and of course you refused the change of use or the planning application previously. So with that in mind, Chair, and in line with national and local planning policy, the proposal is considered to be inappropriate development that fails to preserve and protect the character and appearance of the Grade 2-star Church of St Peter's, Green Lane Conservation Area, and would be wholly inappropriate development that would be harmful to the setting and significance of the nearby heritage assets. The insertion of the access into the listed wall would alter the appearance of the wall, creating harm to the wall and Grade 2-star St Peter's Church. Now, in determining the previous application, whilst there are public benefits arising from the outdoor food street market, this does not benefit from a planning permission. Therefore, in my opinion, very little weight can be given to the public benefits associated with that use and thus access created as part of this listed building application. Now, in making my assessment and my professional judgment remains that the level of objection from heritage consultees and the associated harm concerned, and considering those minor benefits, they're not outweighed by the harm to this Grade 2 listed wall, Grade 2 star listed wall. And my recommendation is to refuse the application.
Thank you, Paul. We have one speaker on this, Mr. Forkin from Marketing Derby. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Marketing Derby is a credible organisation. We're the only inward investment agency in the UK to win the Queen's Award. We're a genuine public-private partnership. A key partner in Derby City Council have attracted 5,000 jobs into this city and £500 million of investment. There's 3 points I really wanted to make on this. One is to apply what my board called, when they looked at this, the common sense test. Secondly, that heritage and investment are good for each other. And thirdly, that we really need to roll out the red carpet for investors. First, in terms of the recommendation for refusal, we believe this does fail the common sense test. Economic benefits clearly outweigh the impact on heritage. In fact, we're dealing here with a very distressed, weak city centre. The 2008 crash, the online shopping revolution, and the impact of COVID have weakened it further. And Derby City Council itself has an ambition document, which I have here, which calls for the radical transformation of the city centre in order to save it. This application is exactly what we mean when we say radical transformation. This application is exactly what we need. I go on a walk about twice a week around the city centre, and sometimes it's glass half full, sometimes it's glass half empty. This application would really have created the footfall required to change the city. Heritage, my second point is around heritage is good for investment, and investment is good for heritage. It is a symbiotic relationship. And I don't really see why it's often pitched against each other. Historic England got it wrong. It's not a public open space. It's not an amenity for the area. St. Peter's Church is actually some way away. And from my walkabout today, maybe a bigger threat to the church is its setting, or the 8 cars that were parked in front of it this afternoon. It's a lovely street, but it's suffered some really difficult times. It was ground zero during the period of the drug zombies, which many of us will remember, and it's still edgy today. And the truth is, people make places. And this yard outdoor street market would have attracted people, lunchtime, summer evenings, thousands on the way to performance venue. Finally, Derby really should be rolling out the red carpet to anyone looking to improve the city, to anyone seeking to support our vision and to help us deliver it. Steve's journey, which is 18 months, has been bumpy at best. And I think we need to kind of consider a reshifting of our emphasis from a focus on the impact of setting more towards the benefit to heritage and benefit to the city. And too much heritage has been allowed to rot in this city. Any walkabout will show that. And I think we need to work together to be more proactive, encouraging investment that benefits both that heritage and the broader city itself, instead of making life difficult for people who are trying to do that. So in conclusion, thanks for inviting and for giving us a voice. Thanks for visiting the site. We really do appreciate that. We will work with councillors and officers in the future, obviously, but I'm afraid this time I think the report has got it wrong. And the common sense says, please approve.
Thank you, Mr. Forkin. Again, another well-timed presentation. Thank you. Councillors? I've got Councillor West and Councillor Kerr. Mr. Forkin, would you just... That's it, lovely.
Thanks, Chair. On this occasion, I am going to repeat Mr. Clark because I picked the bit out deliberately. So paragraph 200 of the MPPF states that any harm to or loss of the significance of a designated heritage asset from its alteration or destruction or from development within its setting should require clear and convincing justification. Given the previous application has been refused and there are therefore no public benefits arising from the associated street food market, harm would most definitely be caused following the insertion of access to the wall, and I support the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
I'm really pleased that Marketing Derby are a credible organisation, and I want them to show that to us as often as possible, as often as relevant. And that doesn't negate what I said earlier. In this case, I want to look at this from the perspective of the wall, because that is what we're looking at. And from the perspective of the wall, it is not the wall's fault that the land behind it and the land to the right of it in the plan in front of us are in different ownership. If the ownership was the same, then there would be a clear way of getting into that site without causing damage to the wall. So I'm putting the wall first and leaving it up to the people who are much younger than that wall to work out how they can gain access to that land if development on that land is appropriate in a way that does not do damage to the wall. So I will also support the officer's recommendation on this occasion.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. Can I just check with Mr Teasdale? I'm okay to talk on this one and cast a vote. Can you give me that view? I doubt it's going to matter, but for the not for the record, but as my comments, I fully support Marketing Derby. That's all I'll say. I'll not take part further.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Councillor Rawson.
Yes, just to reiterate what I said previously. Yes, we're here to consider the wall, but we're also here to consider the people who live in Derby and the economic viability and the future of the city centre, to put it bluntly. So again, it's about weighing up potential harm, and I continue to regard the harm that's done is acceptable when compared to the potential benefit that would come from a potential development such as this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything you've heard, Paul, that you want to comment on? Anyone else want to speak at all? It's councillors. So, does somebody want to move and second the officer's recommendation for refusal, please?
I'm happy to move the refusal.
Councillor Kerr. Carr. Can we go to the vote, please? Those wishing to support the refusal. 3. Those against? 2. Thank you. That's refused. So the next application is regarding 26 Highfield Road. And that's you, Laura, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. This full planning application number 26 Highfield Road seeks to change the use of the dwelling house to an 8-bed house in multiple occupation, along with a single-storey extension to the rear. The application property is a semi-detached 3-storey dwelling house fronting Highfield Road with no on-street parking and a private garden to the rear. During the life of the application, the correct ownership certificate B has been submitted along with amended plans to reduce the length of the extension, resulting in the removal of a bedroom. The extension is of a modest scale and located to the rear and considered acceptable in terms of its design, scale and impact on the character of the dwelling house, street scene and neighbouring properties. The application has attracted 57 letters of objection, including letters from councillors Swan, Martin and Repton. The letters of representation have been summarised within your report in section 3, and they centre largely on the impacts of the change of use, the number of occupants and the impacts associated with such. Whereas the occupation of number 26 Highfield Road by 8 people would result in an increase in activity compared to the existing single household and the fallback position of a 6-person house in multiple occupation, it would not be so significant to warrant refusal of this application. In determining this application, members must be mindful of the tilted balance which effectively raises the bar for refusal of residential development. The test for refusing residential development proposals is whether or not the adverse effects of granting permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of doing so. The adverse effects in this instance would be those outlined in your report insofar as they are applied to the 2 additional people beyond the fallback position of a 6-occupant house in multiple occupation. And the benefits in this instance is the increase in residential accommodation in the context of the council having no 5-year housing land supply. The recommendation is that the adverse effects would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, and overall the proposal is considered to be acceptable with regards to character, amenity and highway safety. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval and broadly complies with the relevant planning policies as set out in your report. Chair, Councillors Repton and Martin wish to address the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Repton, you have 3 minutes.
The inadequate and undemocratic controls we have over many planning applications in this city are simply not acceptable. This lack of control frustrates councillors and the public alike. Whatever happened to the promise of localism by government, with local people and local councillors deciding what is right in their area? This particular application is an overdevelopment. There will be overlooking of surrounding properties, loss of amenity, loss of light, increased parking, with the problems that 8 people and their guests will provide. It's out of keeping with the area and it's completely inappropriate. Local people throughout Derby are frustrated that this planning committee keeps passing planning applications that are simply not acceptable. And the sooner we get tighter controls of our local plan, the sooner we get control of officers as well by improving the powers that we have, then we can stop developments that are simply not acceptable to local people. We represent those local people, and I'd urge you, councillors, tonight, please, please, support local people, draw a line in the sand and say this is not acceptable, and actually reject it. At the very, very least, 8 properties that will be contained with this one development is just not acceptable. I would urge outright rejection of this application, but certainly 8 is far too great. Please, councillors, reject it in the interest of local people and their views. We know the problems in this city with the wrong sort of applications coming forward. It is now time for you to stand up, and you will be judged on how you vote this evening. Please.
Councillor Martin, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. This is one home that's proposed to be converted into 8 individual homes. This development is not wanted by the local community. As said, there have been 60 objections registered. And I ask the committee tonight to support the views of the local community. Firstly, this conversion is not needed. Highfield Road is situated in an area of relatively high density housing already, with a number of HMOs already in place in neighbouring streets. There are plenty of apartments and flats nearby. This is a large house that can accommodate a larger family and or folks who work at home. In fact, I know people who've lived on that road in the past and do exactly that, needed every room in the house. So often we hear that more executive homes are needed in the city, which was indeed a pretext used for the Kettleston Road housing development. This house on Highfield Road has been and could be again an executive home for a large family. Secondly, this conversion isn't right for potential occupants. Once again, we see a proposal to squeeze the maximum profit from a dwelling by putting 8 separate households in one dwelling. To argue that a family of 6 or even potentially 6 individuals might live there anyway is to miss the point. A household that is sharing all facilities and possibly transport, etc., enjoys far more space overall for each person than if each person has to live within their own space. It is not equivalent. And thirdly, this conversion isn't right for the neighbouring community. There are pressures already right across the area regarding on-street parking. residents there themselves, people who live there, go to great lengths to maintain the character of their properties. And we have no guarantee that the owner of an HMO would do so. And as stated in the report, there are heritage properties nearby. And with 60 objections, the community is saying, not this house, not this conversion. So I urge the committee to listen to the local community, as indeed you would to your own constituents, and refuse this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything, Laura, you want to come back on?
Yes, please, Chair. I think I'll just draw members' attention to page 110 of your report, because it just sets out where other HMOs are in the location of the application site. And as you'll see, there are a couple sort of to the south, but there isn't an over-intensification of this type of licensed HMO in this direct vicinity. I appreciate Councillor Martin's position with regards to the number of occupants. However, the fallback position is a reality. So if permission is refused for an 8-bed house of multiple occupation, the applicant can convert to a 6-bed without requiring planning permission. So when you are considering the impacts and those adverse impacts that could significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, it is only those two people, those two additional people that you're considering. It's not the 8 in the total. I think in terms of Councillor Repton's points with regards to the extension, the massing, the overlooking, the extension is acceptable in terms of its scale. It's single storey, so it won't necessarily overlook neighbouring properties. From upper floors, it's a residential property already, so any relationship is already existing in that use as well. Thank you.
Councillors? Councillor Carr?
This is yet another application where we could really do with what we've all talked about at a number of meetings, Article 14. I've read through this very carefully. I fail to see, while I have every sympathy with the councillors and the people in the neighbourhood, we couldn't defend this at appeal. So I reluctantly conclude I'd have to support the officer's recommendation, Chair.
Councillor Kerr and Councillor Rawson.
We've heard that one of the concerns about this is the potential for further parking congestion, and in the overview we've got there at the moment, there clearly is quite a lot of parking along the road, though it isn't completely parked up. It's not the same situation as we get in some of the more inner city terrace streets where we have also had additional parking. Now, as a sort of semi building, there is actually access down one side of it. Now, looking at the street view, which I don't know if everybody can see, but I have looked at, I don't know whether there is capacity to provide off-street parking, and whether that is something that that members would think would actually improve the situation, or whether it would actually make it worse. It is tight down the side of the property, but it does seem to be potentially space to put a vehicle, a domestic car down there. But as has been stated, we don't have a lot of control over this at the moment. There was an item that went to Cabinet yesterday regarding further licensing of buildings, houses in multiple occupation. If that goes forward, then at least some of the issues about the control of what goes on here and the quality of the living environment and the maintenance of the building would probably be improved and managed better. But at the moment, I too will feel that it's the only option for this committee is to approve this, given the current planning environment.
Thank you. Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. I think the local councillors have made a very powerful argument with their concerns about this particular application, and yet again we find ourselves here with very similar applications, unsuitable proposals for residential areas such as this. Councillor Kerr's mentioned the parking issues, and you can see very clearly from from that slide that we've got before us exactly what those the parking issues are, over intensification of the use of this particular property. So I think it's vital that this planning committee gets actually gets some teeth and the ability to be able to properly regulate and license these houses in multiple occupation, and I look forward to officers, the cabinet, full council, whoever, moving forward with those proposals so that we can actually regulate in an effective way these sorts of applications that continually come before us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. It is something that both the Chair and I, as Vice Chair, have entered into a great deal of communication and correspondence with Mr. Clark on this matter. I think we've got to say, if it's going to be done and when it's going to be done, it's got to be done right. Because if not, if we get a loophole in it, it's pointless doing anything at all. So that's the major thing. It's all about evidence gathering and getting the evidence for the Secretary of State to say. Anyone else want to speak? Councillor Kerr?
Chair, I've just spoken to the Highways Officer and he might have a look at this. But he says that there is potentially space for access down the side of the building for parking. And I would like to put at least an advisory note for potential off-road parking to be explored.
Paul?
Sorry to jump in.
They can explore it.
It is on the back of an approval. We could put an advisory note saying, "Can you explore?" In practice, knowing the site, knowing the street, they might find it difficult to actually back out onto that busy. It's. I wouldn't want to put a condition on there, Chair. And by trying to redesign the scheme now, if we provide cycle parking, I think great idea. We could get access to that down the side of the property. As soon as you start putting an access down there and turning facility, you're eating into their amenity space and everything else that's in the back garden. If members are minded to approve this scheme, I think we could put a note to applicant on that you might wish to consider off-street car parking. But that's as much as we can push it.
Thanks, Paul. Well, you've heard what Paul's had to say on this. Are we minded to grant planning permission with that advisory? Does somebody want to move that and second it? Thank you. Can we vote on that, please? Those in favour? Those against? So now we need somebody who's going to formulate the appeal and the reasons for the refusal. Does anybody want to volunteer for that? Anybody want to formulate the reasons for refusal?
I just think somebody else might want to take a little bit of initiative in that. But in the opinion of the local planning authority, the proposal would have a detrimental impact on the character of the immediate area and the residential amenities enjoyed by existing neighbours in terms of increased activities, associated disturbance and the over-intensification of the use of this dwelling house. The proposal would also serve to increase pressure on existing on-street parking levels on surrounding highways, which would also, as a result, detrimentally impact on neighbouring amenities. For these reasons, the proposal is contrary to Safe Policy GD5 of the adopted City of Derby Local Plan Review and the overarching guidance in the NPPF, which seeks to protect the amenities of individuals who are affected by the development of land and buildings.
Councillor West, couldn't put it better myself. Thank you very much.
Sorry, could you take a vote sort of
I'll vote on that
in terms of supporting those reasons?
Right,
for
yep.
refusing?
Can we have a vote on supporting the reasons for refusal then, please? And against?
Carried.
That's been carried, thank you. Councillor
I don't
West,
think Councillor West actually volunteered.
do you want to volunteer?
If the appeal's in the next 5.5 months, absolutely.
Right. Thank you. West, would you mind emailing us your reason? Thank you. Thank you.
Right, so moving swiftly on, we've got 38 Prince George Drive, which is Aaron going to present that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. We've received late comments from the agent, which I'm minded to read out to committee. The agent, JMI Planning, states, further to the deferral of this application from the previous meeting, Planning Control, we are pleased that the revised report continues to support the proposal. The updated comments of the Highway Authority confirm they have no objections to the proposal. They also confirm that Prince George Drive is subject to waiting restrictions and permit holder only parking. The applicant is happy to confirm that they have applied for parking permits, ensuring that staff and visitors can park anywhere around the estate. The applicant has also sought to provide details of local bus services to staff and management, as well as encouraging the use of sustainable transport options, including bikes and walking. On this basis, we hope that you are able to follow your officer's recommendation and grant planning approval for this valuable and much needed form of accommodation. Members will recall this application was discussed at the previous committee meeting and deferred for further information and a site visit. A site visit did recently take place, which some members could attend. Updated highway comments have been received. They are on page 81 of your report. Full plan permission is sought for the change of use of the existing dwelling into a 4-bedroom dwelling to a home for children in care for up to 3 children. As previously stated, the use has commenced earlier in the year and continues to operate. Up to 2 care workers would be required at the home at any given time during the day, including overnight, ensuring wraparound care. The care home would have to be registered with the Care Quality Commission and comply with all the necessary legislation that ensures the care home is run to an appropriate standard. It's not within the remit of the planning system to seek control of the day-to-day operation and functioning management of the children's home, nor can we control the suitability of its users. The 2 key issues with this application relate to residential amenity implications and highway parking impacts. In terms of highways, Prince George Drive is permit holder only parking. A garage and driveway exists to the side, and as you may be able to see from site photos, 2 average sized cars can fit on that drive. The site photos also shows cars parked on the private access drive outside the application property in front of the curtilage hedge. It is this ad hoc parking around the application site which is causing some of the localised parking issues. No details have been provided of visitor frequency or staff shift patterns or the management regime. However, it would not be reasonable or enforceable in planning terms to restrict by condition the number of visitors or vehicles present on the site at any one time. This would interfere with the operational functioning of the home, affecting how and when health professionals, family visitors could attend the property, and it would also be impossible to monitor. I can confirm that the applicant would be eligible to apply for resident visitor parking permits, and unauthorised on-street parking is enforced. The issue of residential amenity implications is relevant. During the period of its unauthorised use, there have been police-related incidents at the application site. Numerous points are made by objectors of acts of antisocial behaviour relating to the occupants. The perception and fear of crime can be a material planning consideration, but it must be based on sound evidence rather than anecdotal evidence. Police incident reports could constitute sound evidence, so there is some potential tangible evidence to demonstrate that the use and activity in this location would result in a degree of harm to residential amenity. As the proposed number of bedrooms at the property would remain unaltered, there would be no intensification of use, rather a difference in activity to what may be anticipated in a normal residential use of a house. As per your report, a recommendation to grant plan permission is given. Chair, there is one speaker to address committee, and the highway officer is here to field any highway-related questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fryatt, I believe you want to speak on this issue. You've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm here speaking on behalf of most of the residents, just because we have a capacity and option to reject. Everyone who applied had objected to this, but this was post facto after, as acknowledged, the care home had been used for nearly a year. It was a concern about residential permits, which the previous speaker has addressed, and saying that they are applying for them. Begs the question, why within a year haven't they succeeded in getting them? And also, the primary concern there is that this parking provision is also unenforceable. The application states 3 parking spaces off-road in the initial application. I'm not sure if it's revised, but as I say, there's 2 spaces on the driveway, and the garage is never used. They don't seem to have access to it. And as you can see there, there is 4 cars, and that's not ad hoc. If ad hoc counts as overnight, as seen with the image with the emergency services, that was just a few days ago, and it was like that again a fortnight ago. So it's every couple of weeks or so that they're attending. In fact, a fortnight ago, they couldn't get the stretcher out to help the poor individual. They had to move the cars. So that was an unnecessary delay. So my primary concerns, and primary concerns of many people, is the safety and the appropriateness of this, because there is no enforceable parking provision. You can say they're applying for permits, but they don't have to as long as it's an adopted highway. And similarly, it could not just be them or their visitors or healthcare workers parking ad hoc in front of the property in an adopted highway. It's every resident on the street. That was taken during the day. During the evening, there's many cars parked along that side, which are residential cars, which are work cars, people who take their van for their job, and then they'll park it on the street with a residential permit. If they realise, I could just park in front of 38, I don't need to pay for a permit anymore, that van would be there all night, all day, if they could, and then people within 38 could do nothing about it. As I said, unenforceable. So it's been blocking emergency access, it's blocking access to residents, I've seen multiple people walk around, but safety is a primary concern, both for access for emergency vehicles and for staff and residents, because there was an issue where the police were called out. The staff were trapped on the 3rd floor, barricaded in to protect themselves from the individual, and when the police came, front door's locked, they drop out the keys, it lands on the awning just above the doorway. It's only because a neighbour had a broom handy that they could even access the property to apprehend the person causing assault. If it wasn't for that, they'd have to kick the door in, potentially. Well, police can batter it down, but still. 3 stories, staff at the top, barricaded in. They couldn't escape. So if that, say, was a fire, for example, in the stairway, so please, consider this carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fryatt. Another excellently timed presentation. Aaron, do you want to come back on anything that's been said?
I've no further clarification.
Highways, have you got anything to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. I've tried to set things out very carefully in the report that you've seen, but I just perhaps need to highlight that Prince George Drive is not public highway. It's not adopted. It will not be. The driveway off of Prince George Drive clearly isn't ever going to be either. It's not really within our remit to make comments upon private parking on private drives.
Thank you. Councillors, anybody wish to comment on that? Thank you, Councillor.
Chair, I think the Speaker has made a very good case for what they are currently experiencing in terms of change of residential environment with the use of this property, and it maybe is an advantage to know what it is like in that location with this use and, you know, the enforcement situation that they are currently in. The parking enforcement team, I spoke to the manager today. He was not aware halfway through this afternoon of any application from that dwelling for a business parking use. I'm really pleased to hear that there is an intention to apply for permits, but it must have been very recent for it not to be showing up on the scheme, or they are failing to pay for those permits because they will need to pay for permits. But they are eligible for business permits for that site. There is a question there, though, as to whether the business permits will actually be in the right cars, and people who are actually coming, as to whether they will actually be provided with the permit in a timely manner, and therefore whether they will actually use them and be parking on the main drive itself, or whether they will continue to park on the unenforceable browner area, the slightly greenier area on the plan, which is not subject to residential parking restrictions. So if they haven't got a permit, they will continue to park in that haphazard and obstructive manner that we've seen of photographs taken by a number of residents. If they have got a permit, they can be actually parking sensibly. If they haven't, then they will continue to park in this manner. And I don't think that it is within the remit of the social services and the social services side of Inspectorate to require people to be managing parking as one of their oversights. So, you know, the inspection regimes that we might be able to use for control of other matters in this area, such as noise, are not going to be helpful for the parking situation. And the parking situation is clearly very poor at the moment, both for the emergency services and others. I also welcome the comments about encouraging use of this of transport to this building by walking and cycling. We haven't got a condition on at the moment for parking, secure cycle parking. If the cars are parked two up on the driveway, then I don't think we'll be able to open the garage door to put a bicycle in. So we would need to have some sort of condition to ensure that there is access to cycle parking if there is going to be people making use of cycling to this. Otherwise, they'll be looking to the railings in the front, which I don't think is adequate for a long-term daily commuting situation. It should be safe, covered cycle parking. There is a possibility other homes along that front do have one off-street cycle parking in front of the property. This property has a hedge and a little bit of amenity ground in front of it. And it could be that we could condition providing one additional parking space, which would be quite difficult to access, but would be at least one more space, not requiring a permit. And I think committee, if we approve this, then I think committee ought to require an additional parking space where the hedge is at the moment, just to ease the uncontrollable parking situation. But my personal view is that the lack of control over what is clearly chaotic parking, the change of nature to this area. There's a lot of people who work shifts in this area because it is very convenient. So noisy occupations and activities around a property in the, during the day and in the early evening are impacting on shift workers who are working at the hospital nearby. And if we can't control that, if we've got arguments going on about the parking, it is not the right environment for people who are then going to be looking after people who are in great medical need at the hospital, and they're also shift workers to other areas as well who have chosen to live here because it is generally a fairly quiet area. So for me, the change that this has brought to this community is something that we should be mindful of, and we should, for those reasons, turn down this change of use.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Is there anything you want to come back on there, Aaron, or indeed highways?
It might be on some members' mind. I'd just like to ask a question. I don't know the answer. When we talk about private permit area, this isn't controlled by the council, is it? It is. So the permit is, but it's not adopted highway. Yeah. Yeah, it's where it gets all confusing.
Yeah.
I was just a bit. My concern is, obviously, clearly we have jurisdiction over the change of use. The use of the premises, is that use appropriate on this site? We can control that. Thereafter, almost moves into the territory of management issues of the property. Whether or not they have a parking permit is up to them, because they won't be able to park there if they haven't got a permit, because it's down to enforce. Which leads us neatly into a legal territory of, I guess it's how far do we take into account their inability to park safely with no highways objection? Because if they haven't got a permit to park, they're going to be potentially parking on the service road, should we call it, which effectively blocks in other people, but that's surely a private matter between the landowners of that service road and not the planning authority.
Not only blocks out the people, but it blocks out the services that should be using the service road.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
Sorry, Chair, could we use microphones, please? Thank you.
My apologies, Stephen, my fault there. Yeah, sorry.
Would it be helpful for me to repeat that? The site at the moment is still owned by the developers, Tilia, and it will be transferred from the point of view of maintenance to a management company, which at the moment is overseen by the developer, but will be in the future at some point transferred to a committee of residents from the estate, and they pay an element towards the management of that land. It will also cover public open space.
So presumably there is some control over that in terms of if there are issues, but it has to go through the Tilia, as the owner, and presumably in future through the management company. So in terms of the control of the parking on the service road. So those are issues that, in many senses, are private issues that can be addressed. Obviously, there's no guarantee that they will be addressed. But certainly one would assume that the people who bought the houses there have some some influence over the service road and the managers, but that's an assumption rather than a fact.
I think, through you, Chair, at the present, any influence is over talking to your neighbours and saying, please don't park there, you're being obstructive. I don't know if it's got to the point where neighbours have been at fisticuffs and the police have been involved, but in terms of management, I can't see a management company which is based some distance away coming in and sending any enforcement officers. It would be our PPO team at the moment.
I mean, it's far from me to start becoming involved in the debate, but presumably that would also apply to whoever was living in whatever property there in terms of control on sort of who's parking on the surface road. I mean, so it wouldn't necessarily. It depends on it could actually involve any property on that, irrespective of the use, couldn't it?
So if you, Chair, through you, if you are a car owner on a site like this, you either know that you have to use the parking space in front of your property, or you bite the bullet and get a permit. And a residence permit, it actually costs less than a business permit. If you are the employee of a business, you are at the, you have to expect your manager to organise that business permit, and you may not have control over that. It may not be in your remit as an employee to ensure that you have appropriate business permit, and when you get there, there is somebody who can issue a temporary permit because you are a social worker who have just come to visit, or somebody who's come from education to provide some out-of-school tutelage or whatever. It's a much more complicated situation when you don't have a householder in place, but you have a business running from a residential situation.
Anyone else want to add to this debate? Councillor Rawson.
So, thank you, Chair. Yeah, as I said last time, it's this sort of residential care home it's very different from a standard residential dwelling, largely because of, in my view, the traffic, the additional traffic, car journeys that are generated by professionals who, not just the members of staff who are working there, but also the healthcare workers who are coming and going, social workers who are coming and going, various different professionals involved in the lives of those children. So it's good to see that the application has come in as a residential care home rather than a residential dwelling, which I think there was some confusion about previously. So we do need to treat it differently. This particular property was built as a residential property, not necessarily designed with adequate car parking spaces or room around it to be able to facilitate what's actually needed. I think all of us on the committee would very much support the idea of children and young people in care living in a more family orientated, more residential type property such as this one. But we have to consider the impact on neighbours and make sure that where that happens, there's the appropriate infrastructure around the property in order to support the professionals who will be visiting and all of the other implications that come from a conversion to a residential care home. So whilst I think most of us, as I say, would be supportive of in general principle, we have to look at the individual cases. And from all the evidence that we've seen in this particular location, it doesn't seem capable of supporting this type of residential care facility, I'm afraid. So it needs some further work doing, in my opinion, before it would be suitable.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak on this?
I'm just wondering, I don't know whether this issue's been explored, but whether there's any, this is possibly to Paul. Sorry, Paul. I was just gonna, I don't know if it's been explored, but is there any potential for some form of undertaking, Section 106, form of undertaking in terms of control of parking of employees and staff?
Through you, Chair, it's something we could explore, but I guess that the nervousness being shown is the use is probably okay. It's the residual of that use, given the specific circumstances of the street. It's almost the management or the absence of management, be it permits or Tilia or whoever managing, so where people park is a management issue, and that isn't happening. So the use itself might be okay, but the fallout isn't. So does that capture what people have been saying? We perhaps could do a Section 106, but it depends on the extent of the controls that the operator, the applicant, has.
I mean, I wouldn't want to predetermine. Sorry.
Chair, I asked the head of parking services about the potential for changing the area of control for the parking to include the service road, because I too thought that that might be a solution. And he pointed out that a change such as that would need to be done in consultation with the people along that service road. And if the majority of people on that service road said it was not acceptable to them because it would impose other restrictions which they would otherwise not have, it could be turned down. And just by changing the corner here would just mean that people then park further down the road and the obstruction moves rather than being prevented. So his professional advice was that he did not see that as a viable solution.
Yeah, I was thinking of something slightly different to that, but yeah, I think obviously we can look into that, possibly depending on what your decision is tonight. No, Chair. I think I get the sense of the feeling of the committee in terms of the application tonight and the way that they want to move it, but I don't want to overly prejudge that. But it's always open. If the committee were minded to refuse it, it's always open to the applicant to come back and try and address concerns of the committee. I mean, and that may possibly be to explore Section 106 unilateral undertaking, but obviously I'm not prejudging what the committee is going to decide tonight.
Thanks, Stephen. Well, the recommendation is grant planning permission with conditions. Does anybody want to move and second that? Councillor Carr will move it. Does anybody want to second it? Thank you.
Councillor, take a vote on that.
Yeah, we'll take a vote on that. Councillor West, thank you.
Chair, could we, if it's to be approved, could we ensure that there is a cycle parking condition included? To ensure that the proposals by the managing company to encourage cycling is actually achievable from the point of view of good employee cycle parking and visitor cycle parking.
Yeah,
we could do that, Chair. Sorry, we could do that, Chair. Probably in the garage, because you won't want to park on the forecourt in front of the garage.
But then can't park on the forecourt because you can't open the garage door to get the samples in.
So we can do it by condition.
Okay.
Obviously, we're sort of slightly different things. But do you want to leave that matter, if it is approved, for the officer to explore them?
Okay, so at the moment then, we've got it moved and seconded. Can we go to the vote on this recommendation, please? All those in favour? 2. All those against? It's lost.
With your refusal and for reasons.
Yeah. So we're going to move to a refusal, and we need the reasons for the refusal. Does anybody want to volunteer?
I haven't got a nice spiel like Councillor West. But
should have tried harder.
But the parking situation is clearly one of them. The change in nature of the experience in the local area, particularly being mindful that there are a significant number of shift workers due to the proximity of the hospital and hospital workers working shifts. So it's the noise related, and it's the parking situation. And it needs to be enhanced because of this location and the nature of people who choose to live in that area because of its locality.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. Could we have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Rawson. And can we have a vote on that, please? Thank you. If you're all happy with that refusal?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thank you.
Any against?
And any against? None. Yeah. And Lucy, are you going to be the? Are you going to do the appeal?
I will do an appeal. Sorry, I will do an appeal if needed.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. And that brings the applications to an end, doesn't it? We're on to item 9 now.
We haven't actually mentioned W9.
Oh, right. Apparently, I've just got to mention 79 Rickland Road, the application has been withdrawn.
No, not the application, I think. It's just been withdrawn from the agenda.
One withdrawn from the agenda. Thank you very much. 9, Ian, down to you for site visits, I believe.
Yes, on to the main event, Chair. Yeah. First application, Go Outdoors on Ascot Drive. There it is. Easily visible from the public zone. It's been. You best get there quick, Councillor Carr. It's going to be demolished with 6 units in its stead. all visible from the public zone. Second one, James, please. City centre site, again, highly visible from the public zone. Changing the ground floor to a clinic and the upper floors to 11 apartments, formerly Barclays Bank. Lloyds Bank, even.
What's its heritage status? It's in the conservation area, isn't it? Are there heritage?
It's in the city centre conservation area. Is it listed? Possibly, but it's in the city centre conservation area.
It was whether there was, if there's any listed elements that we should be mindful of in its change of use, that we need to go and look at the inside of.
There are elements within the all floors to be remodelled, of course, and we've just dealt with a shopfront alteration scheme. I can't remember if it's listed or not. James will tell me in a minute. We'll crack onto the waterfall anyway. Third item. Another public house being remodelled. Ground floor reduction in public house space, and then the creation of 31 apartments. Scheme being forwarded by Latham's.
Is there anything on that site that can't be seen? Because I know that this has already been brought up in the local paper, and there's a lot of objections and a lot of feeling about this. And I just wonder if this is something that we might need to go to look at, if there's anything that we can't see from the street to be able to make
Yeah.
a good decision at the meeting rather than defer it. Because
Yeah,
I'm
it might be
quite
worth
frankly sick
visit.
of that.
Councillor West, there's stuff at the back of the site that's being demolished, and then there are sort of big spaces at ground level that are currently in operation as as part of the pub, not the sort of corner element as you come off the street, but other elements at ground level. So, and yeah, it's quite an interesting scheme. So it might be one to take a visit to. Great.
Yeah, yes, Chair, I'd be interested.
Yeah.
You know, I can't see what they're actually going to do. I'd be interested. I've been in that building a few times. So
Yeah, it's an
I'd like to
interesting
have a look
scheme.
I'd
Yeah,
like to have a look at it.
I'm sure Lathams would walk you around the building as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, back to 43 Irongate. It's grade 2 listed. Yeah.
In that case, I think we probably ought to have a look to see what's inside and
Okay.
how that will impact.
Yeah. Okay. Not that one, Chair. Fourth item, another public house being remodelled. Crown and Arrow, Symphony Avenue. Pub at ground floor with apartments at first floor and second floor, with various alterations, extensions. You can see it all from the street. Possibly. People having different drinking habits. Okay, final item, 110 Ashbourne Road, sits on the corner of Knoll Street. It's a HIMO being demolished actually and being rebuilt. Four units at ground floor, 4 at first floor and 2 at second floor. Small flat offer, but highly visible from the public zone. So, did you want to confine your attention to 43 Irongate and the Waterfall public house? I'll arrange things.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
Before we finish tonight, Paul would just like a quick word with everybody.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to arrange things and say 15th of December training session. I'd like to kick off at 5 o'clock, especially for Christmas. I've got the Derby On proposals, hot off the press, coming in to present their scheme as a part of their pre-application. 5 o'clock kick-off, same room, Joseph Wright, but it'll give you opportunity to speak to the Architects Direct and question them, questions that you wouldn't necessarily raise at committee. You could do it with them. Obviously 5 till 10 to 5 to 6 before the meeting on the 15th. But I thought it'd be a really good one to share with you because they are proposing some significant changes to their estate. And that's on the 15th. And I know they are doing a public consultation event on the 2nd and 3rd, which you may get invites to. That's in the Derby On shopping centre. You might get invites anyway, but at least you get them first hand for 50 minutes. And we'll see if we can get some debate going with them. Thank you, Chair.
So I take it mulled wine and mince pies are on.
Yes, Mr. Woodhead is stepping up to the mark.
Well done, thank you, Ian. Just the wine, no